Welcome to the podcast, Jiaming.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I would love for you to share your background. I know you're second generation
hmm
traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, which is really cool. I love the fact that you actually have your roots there and your father does too. And I feel like that kind of takes it to a whole other level when you're working and learning from your parents. So I'd love to hear your background and have you share it with the listeners.
So I'm a health economist first. So I was in economics basically for 10 years. And I think before COVID, I was running one of the largest think tank on longevity data collecting in the world at the time in Singapore. And then I came back to the States in 2019 and decided to retrain for 4 years. It takes 4 years in California. And
Mhm.
then that's when also around the same time I opened KUN.
Awesome. So, do you longevity? I think of longevity and I think about fertility because a lot of times when we treat fertility, we're actually doing a lot of anti-aging. We don't call it that because we're working on mitochondria and really kind of getting the health
Mhm.
of the eggs and the uterine lining. So, tell us about your experience with fertility and what you've seen in practice.
Well, I mean, I work with a lot of people who have unexplained infertility.
Hmm.
That's actually an area that I work a lot in, and this applies to both men and women among my patients. So I will have a lot of patients who, they probably had a failed rounds of IVF, and then that's when we work together. I
Hmm.
also have a lot of patients who have repetitive miscarriage, which is
Hmm. Yeah.
increasingly uh, common, unfortunately. And then I also work with a lot of women on postpartum, which is more on the traditional side, as you know, in Chinese medicine.
Yes, and so I know that we often get asked this, and I get asked this too, but I love always hearing the different perspectives on Chinese medicine to explain to people in layman terms why does acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I know Chinese medicine is a big umbrella. Acupuncture is really one part. I think most people think just acupuncture, but of course there's moxa, herbs. I mean, there's so many different things. There's also auricular. You can get really detailed on that. So can you explain what Chinese medicine could do really to regulate periods, to regulate ovulation, just kind of help fertility?
Well, I mean, first off, I think I grew up in the Chinese medicine family business. So to me, it's very bizarre when people separate them,
Right. The
separate
acupuncture and the
the
herbs and the
external treatment from the herbal treatment. However, I think customized herbal formulation has always been the elitist form of Chinese medicine. It takes a lot of
Mhm.
family lineage. Pre-bottled stuff aside, for the modern human, really, whether you have fertility issues or not, is really that one has to take a one-on-one approach to effectively treat something that's very complex. So having said that, I only work at KUN for customized herbal formulation. So we don't do, although I'm licensed, I don't do acupuncture for
Oh, got
patients.
it. Oh, I didn't know that. I thought you did acupuncture as well.
No, I don't.
Okay.
We have all of you guys
Which
who are.
actually, I know in China, they do separate it. A lot of times people will get really, really focused on one aspect.
Yes
That's what
and
I've heard.
no. I think in if because in China and Korea they have TCM hospitals, right? So you have different departments where post stroke you go first off to the acupuncture people, which is the physical therapy part of Chinese medicine, and then depending on the severity of the stroke, you likely will get customized herbal formulation on top of that. I usually say that acupuncture is amazing. It's like a great deep spring clean that everyone needs it often. Um, it, Customized herbal formulation and diagnosis is more like a renovation. So they're entirely
Mhm.
different projects. I think when you consider a human as a house, right? You're building a house, you have different needs. In terms of female, I think we go back to the topic I always like to talk about how women are fundamentally very, very important in Chinese medicine. because Chinese historically are obsessed with babies. So this is the reason why a long time ago in all these emperors, like, like palaces, you will have a, a whole college of hundreds of royal physicians, and they're all Chinese medicine doctors. And their goals are not only to make sure the emperor can live for as long as possible, is to make sure all these concubines can produce as many kids as possible. So this is why I think the practice has a lot more interest in the history, right? The history is being that we love kids, and China has one of the largest population in the world throughout history, and so it has a lot of that. You want kids, and you need to care about women's health. So in a nutshell, I really like what you mentioned before, like when I actively worked as a basically longevity economist, and my job was to advise countries in terms of fertility policies, aging population, right? How can you encourage? And I often say that women friendly policies are essentially longevity policies. You don't have women giving birth to kids, then you won't have a sustainable population. This is one of the same. So I really liked you pointed that out. That is totally right. I think not many people think like that. And so in a nutshell, like there is the historical interest, then that would mean that in terms of research, there is the interest in the research, there is interest in data, there is Chinese medicine has been around for 3,000 years, and
Hmm.
gynecology in particular in that field has been around for 3,000 years. This is very different with how Western medicine has developed, right? Like C-section technique, for example, was developed, I don't know, 100 years ago. Like it's really like not comparable in terms of history, even sheer patient number and patient cases. So I think Chinese medicine really, in many ways, excel in
Yeah.
understanding women's health and fertility.
For sure. And I always say, like, with medicine, one of the key things that you want to look at is how well does it age? And Chinese medicine ages really well. So a lot of times you'll see new things, new pharmaceuticals, and then a couple of years later you find out it's not as great, and then something else comes out. With Chinese medicine, I mean, it looks at nature. It really looks at like the elements of nature. And that is something that is consistent. It's just part of really understanding that and then understanding ourselves. So I think that that is so cool about Chinese medicine.
Right. The internal is very much so the physical, right? I'm sure you have too, a lot of patients who on the surface, they're like really healthy,
Mhm.
but they haven't had a period for 3 years. So,
Yep. Yeah.
this is not, and then they will spend the money on Botox, which then you're like, okay, you look good for maybe a month, and then you have to do this again, right? It is very different perspective. I think many people say that, why do, for example, in the practice of postpartum recovery, right? I'm sure you see it, and I see it a lot from the practice where people who are not on top of their health condition, especially in terms of digestive health, are more prone to have thyroid issues or, preeclampsia in the last trimester. And then post birth, this doesn't only drag their health just downhill and then also impact how you're going to have a second kid or a third kid if you want to.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
really completely, y- it really completely wrecks their health in a ways that you didn't even see this coming. And that is a completely different perspective, right? Because often I will
Yes.
have patients who say that, oh, you're the first person who listens. How do you know I have these issues before I even tell you? It is really patterns, and I go back because I am a nerd and I am an economist, like, I go back to data collecting.
Yep.
Chinese medicine, like, in my father's, practice, like, he will start seeing a kid at the age of 5, and then he sees the same kid when the kid is 35. You see a
That's
person
amazing.
in a whole family's, right, conditions throughout their whole life, and that's the best possible data collection you can dream of and you can think of. This is not just oh, here is some pills for antidepressant for postpartum depression. Like,
Yeah.
give a woman a pill like that, they will still have gazillion other issues. Like, what does this solve? And you will hear often for people who have postpartum depression, for example, right? Like, they will then be dependent on antidepressant for the rest of their life. Then one
Correct.
question
Yeah.
is, what does that serve, right?
Yep.
Where does that put you as a human? Do you feel like you're out of control for your own health? So yeah, it's a different approach.
Yeah, completely. It's interesting you say about antidepressants because I feel like it's almost a screen in between me and the person. I feel like I'm not able to fully get through to the person with the
Mhm.
treatments because there's something in the middle, in the way. And of course, I don't tell them just stop because I know that that is a whole process. They have to be under the care of a doctor and tell them how to come out of it because it's not something that you can just suddenly take out. But I often feel like that, and I'd much rather if I can just treat it with nothing else, it'll be a lot easier. And
Mm,
then another thing too is, that I thought you said that was really interesting and true is, I think a lot of times often people just want that positive pregnancy, but you talked about something that is actually crucial. If
mm,
people want a healthy pregnancy and then also healthy afterwards for more kids, you really have to think big picture and not just quick fix. And I think that we're so conditioned for the quick fix that we
mm.
don't think about the whole garden and really tending the soil. And I always think about it like that. It's like, yeah, we could throw a seed in and maybe that's going to sprout. But if we don't give it the conditions it needs, those roots aren't going to go deep and it's not going to be a sustainable, like rooted sprout, which I think is similar with pregnancy. You want not just pregnancy, but you want a healthy pregnancy and you also want a healthy mom and baby. You need it all. It's not like you can have an unhealthy mom, healthy baby. You have to have the whole picture working together.
I think that's why, like, many people getting on IVF, and if you consider the percentage of success rate for IVF is actually not that high, right? And then and a lot of people are disappointed because they feel like I paid all this money and I got it. Why is it not happening? I think first off is because we're all conditioned to think that pregnancy is such a simple thing, right? You do it and you will get pregnant. Uh, the In Chinese medicine, we always say mental is the physical and vice versa. The impact of stress, of our day-to-day demand of being a modern human, whatever that means, has a huge number in our fertility potential, right? I often say to my patients, and I say like, often because my patients might in the middle of it, they didn't come to see me for fertility, but like after they healed from like long COVID or something, they're like, I want to have kids, now I can really think about it. And I will usually say that, definitely be careful with like when you want to get pregnant, because the healthier you are, the more fertile you are. Often I think in this society where we talk about IVF technology ever since it has been introduced, it has become a thing where people feel like, oh, so long as I do it, right? It will happen. And often people get very disappointed when it doesn't happen. And I'm sure you see in your practice a lot in the past 5 years, there is an increasing percentage of people who have to do IVF like twice or three times, and still maybe without success, right? So I think there is a lot to be said about looking at fertility not just as a functionality that you as a woman or you as a human will just somehow have, but is really about your overall health, right? Like, and I often talk to people who have repetitive miscarriage. I'm like, your digestive health is everything. Who is gonna
Yes.
carry the baby is gonna be you. Now,
Mhm.
if you are already having, like, nausea, dry gagging, like, 5 times a day, even when you're not pregnant, your chances of basically having repetitive miscarriage is probably quite high, right? So we have to fix what is the fundamental thing. It's not that let's have a kid, because often I talk about this not very often, but I do treat kids, and you often see a lot of kids who have incredible intolerance for food early in age is due to the fact that mother had a very difficult pregnancy. So this is very much so linked. It's not like you said, it's not like the mother has to be in perfect health. So you have a chance, the mother and father in perfect health, so you have a chance of this baby being in perfect health. Often, even if you could get pregnant, if you have a kid who has so many problems, in the first 2 or 3 years, they're basically, there was one time was a patient of mine who, when he came to see me, he was 2.5 years old, and he was basically deemed a failure to thrive because he couldn't gain weight. And he was having like diarrhea. Often he was having crazy eczema, And then you find out the mom during pregnancy and before pregnancy had a lot of issues. So
Mhm.
this is all interlinked. Yeah.
Yes, it really is. Another thing I see often is people who do IVF and then they go to the doctor and the doctor says, "Well, you barely have anything. You really need to start immediately." And I always encourage them, spend a little time preparing yourself if they haven't come to me. And I say you're much better off waiting a few months, taking care of yourself, nourishing yourself, then doing IVF
Yeah.
than rushing into it because we're just looking at numbers and
Yeah.
not kind of thinking about the quality and the preparation.
Mhm.
Because in
That
3 months, it's not like you're gonna just lose everything, it's gonna just drop off a cliff. I mean, it's gonna be a few more months. You're gonna be in much better position.
I think that's totally true. I mean, in the old country in East Asia, when you prepare for pregnancy, 6 months is very standard. That's when your partner quit smoking, they quit drinking, you both eat healthy, all of those stuff, right? And in this country, we don't. It's
Yeah.
almost like nobody necessarily prepare it. Everyone just expect it would just happen until it doesn't happen after a while, and suddenly it goes from, oh, I'm really casual about it to now I'm in a panic. I must do IVF, right?
Mhm.
And a large, obviously, unexplained infertility has a lot to do with there are multiple root causes. One of the most common ones I have seen is actually intense liver cheese stagnation, where
Mhm.
often women consider themselves as a failure for not being able to get pregnant. And the more you, and I usually be able to tell with a patient when for the first consultation, they will say, I need to be pregnant by this date.
Right.
You're not a machine. We're not
Mhm.
AI. It doesn't work like that. And often I don't know whether you experience this in your practice as well, but I always ask about whether the partner or whoever is the sperm donor, whether they have tested. Oftentimes,
Mhm.
they have
Yes.
not.
Yeah, I
It's the
agree.
woman who has done all the
No, it
work,
happens. I've seen that a lot,
right?
and sometimes the doctors don't even mention it.
Right. And it's shocking to me
Yeah.
because, as we all know through research, I believe it was the newest study done using collective data from Europe. The sperm quality, both in terms of speed and quality, to say, is 50% lower than like 20, 30 years ago.
I
And this
know.
is understandable due to drug, due to not sleeping, due to not taking care of ourselves, right? Due to stress.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
why is it always that we're plowing the field of a woman? And I always say this, I said, the worst thing would be I'm plowing your field and the seed is subpar.
Mhm. Right.
Then how, so,
Correct.
right? Like, so
Yep.
like, it's so easy for the man to get checked. It takes
Mhm.
no time at
So
all.
easy. I know.
So, like, how is it in this, like, this is almost common sense, both in terms of money, in terms of time, get your sperm donor, partner checked
Yeah.
first.
Totally.
It's interesting.
It is for sure. And then also, I mean, it's what's interesting is, yeah, you can get checked and everything looks normal and they're like, everything's perfect, but then the DNA might have something off, which a normal analysis does not cover that. It's a
Yeah.
special test that people take after. And usually they won't do that unless there were like miscarriages or there were failures with the embryos to grow. So they'll check the sperm DNA fragmentation.
It's always a little too late. And
Yeah.
interestingly, I think even given my own experience, like I have two kids and they were born in two different countries.
Mhm.
And the second one who was born in the US, I think even the MD, the gynecologist, like checkup is very minimum.
Mhm.
There was, like if you want like a better, clearer picture, you got to pay more. Like there is, like I think
Yeah.
the standard of what women are provided in this country in terms of like basic, like a basic kind of gynecological service throughout is very low compared to other countries. But I mean, that also creates a lot of tension and anxiety from first time moms, right? You
Yeah.
don't know, and then you show up, and then you said you're having some pain, and doctor's like, it's okay. And then,
You don't feel supported because you
you don't
know
feel
internally
supported.
something's off. Like, you're like,
Right,
"I know something's off. I'm not
right,
crazy." They're
right,
like, "Oh, you're fine. It's in your head."
right. And I
Yes.
think and I think that's really the fundamental difference between Chinese medicine and Western medicine, right? Chinese medicine, this is why a lot of people ask me, they're like, you're a Columbia educated economist, or you wrote for the Economist magazine, and then, you run Nobel Prize winner think tank. Like, but like Chinese medicine, it must be so different. It's actually not. Health economics is all about getting subjective health data from the person you interview. That's not so different from what we do in Chinese medicine. It's about you being the patient who knows best about your health, right? So if you say you have a pain, you have a pain.
Yes.
I'm don't live in your body. I don't get to judge you. I think this is
Yes.
also the reason why so many people feel heard at
Yeah.
Chinese medicine clinics,
Hmm.
um, where they feel like you're just another pregnant person. Like time is up, you're leaving. So
Yeah.
it's a very different process. Yeah.
It is such a different process. And I actually remember myself the first time I went to an acupuncturist. This is like kind of what started it all. I was
Mhm.
in a completely different career, and all I could get from every single doctor I went to was the birth control pills.
Right.
And people hearing this, a lot of my listeners already know my story, but it was just basically I had irregular periods, and that was the only answer I can get. It never made sense to me. On an intuitive sense, I was like, this just doesn't make sense. There's got to be something. And they're like,
Yeah.
nope, that's just your body. The only time you can have normal periods is if you take this. So I went through 12 years of that. And the first time I met my first doctor, Dr. Lee, he's from China, and he actually happened to specialize in gynecology. He sat with me, and one of the biggest takeaways, like the biggest impacts that it had, was him listening to me and
Right.
asking me questions and showing me interest in every part of my life. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. This is so cool. I've never gotten this much attention from anybody on
Right.
like what's going on in my body.
Right.
And then, so that was really fascinating. Of course, that did change my period, and I was resolved. I did the, real raw herbals and the acupuncture. But then also, looking back when I went to school, one of my teachers said, and it kind of like never left my mind, that part of the healing, like the therapy starts before a needle goes in, just by
Mhm.
listening. And the
Mhm.
second you feel heard, that by itself has an impact on your healing.
Right. The physical is the mental, and that is
Yeah.
observed and in every single way we treat patients. I would just say like 90% of my patients not only have like physical ailments, they have a lot of like mental concerns as well, right? And usually as both the mental improve, the physical improve, and vice versa. And this
100%.
usually
Yeah.
seems very like it's like a huge surprise or a big relief to the patients because they're like, I didn't have to take antidepressant pill for this whole time, right? Um, it's I think is it is a very interesting myth we're told. And I don't mean this as a something like I'm simply raising this as a question. How is it that we all come in different shape and form, race, color, experience, lifestyle choices, all of that, and sexes? And then when you say, okay, someone is depressed, you give everybody exactly the same. The only
Right.
thing that
Yeah.
varies is in the dosage.
Yep. That's a good
Isn't that
question.
weird?
Hmm. Yes.
Right? Like it, and if you ask people who are depressed, I'll give you an example because I have a lot of ADHD patients, especially. And the first thing I always ask when I examine the tongue um, for ADHD patients is whether you have anemia. And often they do. But as we know in Chinese medicine, even if the
Yes.
lab
The
says you
heart.
don't have anemia, your tongue can tell me you have anemia. The chance of you being anemic and showing ADHD symptoms is very high. So is that actually ADHD or not? Oftentimes it's actually not true ADHD. This is the reason why a lot of women who thought they have ADHD got on ADHD medication and then they crash when they don't take the medication, right?
Mhm.
Their energy crash, their focus crash. Then this is really a question. It's like, if you take something, it works. The minute you stop, it doesn't work. Did they ever work?
Mhm.
right? It's almost
Did it
like
resolve it? It's not resolving. It's not
right.
a true solution.
Right. And
Yeah.
then when we talk about pregnancy, it's a similar process, right? Is this just we implant a child in your body? Great. I'm glad technology works. But I think if I recall back in the days when IVF was invented, it was not supposed to be used so widely in today's environment. It was
Right. It
for, I
was
believe, for a specific reason, right? There was a
correct.
really strong infertility, I believe, structurally for was it the researcher who invented it? So like it was not supposed to be it's the same thing with C-section. It was not
Right.
supposed to be widely used like today's. I remember when I lived in Singapore, C-section was so popular. It was like you can pick your date. It was a thing. You can
Mhm.
pick an auspicious date to give birth to your child, and everyone goes to have a C-section on the same day.
Yeah.
It wasn't designed like that. It
Yeah.
wasn't meant to be used like that. So I think our modern human need of getting things done, like I need to have a child, here is the child, and here the child is delivered, like this need of doing boom boom boom, just click on your life to-do list, is preventing us to see the garden you talked about, is preventing us from really taking care of ourselves and really do the way that we're supposed to do, that nature enables it, because we probably wants too much. I don't know.
It's a too quick to, it's a quick fix. It's going against the Tao. It's
Right.
going against that present moment, that being present. Because my theory, or because it wasn't really something that I specifically learned, but like the more present you are, the more life force chi you have,
Right.
because you're in this portal, your energy, your attention, like you said, no separation between the mind and the body.
Right.
So the more present we are, the more energy could be here.
Right.
And if our minds are here and then it's somewhere else, or our bodies are just here and our mind somewhere else, we're scattered all over the place. And so let's actually go back, because I thought that was really interesting what you were saying about the liver chi, like really, really severe liver chi
Right.
stagnation.
Right.
For people listening, I've talked about the liver before, but liver chi stagnation is severe stress. It's really being, to me, it's kind of like being in major fight or flight chronically.
Mhm. And it's interesting because the liver stores the blood.
Yeah.
So some people will say, like, especially, it's funny because I lived in New York for a long time, and I will always spot a patient from New York from a mile away, because whenever you ask them, like, are you stressed? They're like, no.
Mhm.
They look really stressed, but they're like, no, I can handle it. This is
Yes.
intense stress.
I know exactly what
Handling
you
it,
mean.
doesn't
Well,
mean
first of
like,
all, I lived in New York, so I know exactly what you're talking about, because I'm a recovering New Yorker. And
right.
then secondly, I have a patient I could just picture in my head right now. I'm like, how are you doing? Everything's perfect. Everything's
Right.
fine. Sleep is good. Good, good, good. Great. And I'm like,
Next
and,
question.
and, and then like every needle that goes in, ow, ow, she's
Right.
like tense.
I
Yeah.
think this is the hardest lesson in life, um, I feel, um, is to desire something and not getting it. Like either not on your timeline or like not the way you want it. And I think liver chi stagnation is exactly that. I mean, traditionally we say, oh, it's anger is more manifested in road rage. But really, in today's society, I like to interpret liver chi stagnation manifested in ways that is like a mild, like a irritability, like a
Hmm.
constant irritability. You're just waiting people to do something wrong, and you're gonna snap at them, right? We're
Hmm.
all familiar with that kind of
It's
feeling.
resistance. It's resistance to life.
Frustration, right?
Hmm.
You're like constantly frustrated. Someone else got a promotion, you think you deserve the promotion, you're not saying anything. Frustration. It is what you think in your head you deserve and the reality, and there is a gross like mismatching here. Um and I every single time I have a patient who comes because of, infertility issues, and I will always spend so much time talking to them about their psychology, like mental health. The way I do consultations, I have a huge part, at least I think total 30% of my total questions about the mental. This matters in
Yeah.
particular to people who have been having difficulty pregnant, and I explain it to my patients like this. If you are so stagnant if your body is so full of stagnation and qi, where do you think a baby can sit? The baby has nowhere to sit. There is no room for the child. And that, in a way, is indeed the hardest lesson, because to be pregnant, to be a parent, to me personally, I think is the hardest thing in life. It's the uncertainty. You can do everything you do right in parenthood, and you don't know how it's going to turn out. And this process actually starts from getting pregnant. Like, so many people feel so certain, oh, I just do it, a couple of times, and during ovulation, I will be pregnant. It doesn't work like that. In Chinese medicine, when it advocates for a healthy pregnancy, it is the jing, it's the qi, it is the answers, it is the spirit and body of you and your partner.
Yep.
I'm not even a religious person, but I would say that is rather agnostic like process, right? Because it depends. You need a bit of luck. For a person who is intensely qi stagnant, they don't believe in luck. I don't know whether you've checked this with your patients.
No, they put everything on their shoulders. They think that it's all up to them, and that's why they feel like they need to control. And it's being in that fight or flight, because you're in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, there's not plenty to go around. Yeah. You need to scrounge, and you need to work, and you need to fight to get whatever you need. And that's ultimately, from an observer's perspective, that's what I see.
Right. And you will see whenever that happens, it's almost like you as a provider, you're being told, like, this is the only thing you're doing. You're giving me a child, and then, like, this is never going to work. This is never going to work, because liver qi stagnation, really, I feel like clinically is one of the major reasons for unexplained fertility. And that in turn frustrates the person even more, because you're telling them structurally there is nothing wrong, but they just cannot get pregnant no matter what they do. Right? So this is already a deeply frustrating process. And telling them that leave it to just follow the protocol and leave it to fate. And I will always notice that 50%, like you always have like 20% of people or 30% of people who are just not. They will ask you, like, what are the best thing I can eat to make this happen faster, right? Like, what is you're going against what you're doing exactly the opposite of what you're supposed to. But that is hard. I think that
is hard. Yeah, it's one of those things that is often missed. And I actually wrote a book about that, because in the book I don't give any diet tips or anything. Like, I'm like, that's not what's needed, because everybody can look up like the best diet, and there's plenty of great books about what can help. And of course, everybody's different, and really understanding kind of your own sensitivities and etc. But my point is that many times people going through the fertility journey are actually very smart. They're very educated, and they educate themselves on supplements and what to do, and so they have that down. But that's not what it's about. I mean, it's about also the nervous system. And I say the nervous system because it's more layman terms, but it's ultimately what the qi does. Like, the qi needs to move and to flow. And if we're in this fight or flight, it stagnates. And so you see that often.
I think that's really true, because it's really about the most difficult thing in life is to dive into uncertainty. You have two types of people you have three types. One type who just like go with the flow, right? Nothing wrong with that. You have one type who always want to get ahead before everybody else. They always want to know everything that's supposed to be done. But when it comes to being pregnant, having a healthy delivery, that's actually not how it works. And I think you got to have a openness to say, I'm going to dive into this uncertainty, because you know what, when a baby is here, when you have to raise this child, right, you're gonna need that when they start going to school, or even when you homeschool them. It doesn't matter. Like, you cannot control everything. And I think that is a very important thing that really starts even during pregnancy preparation.
I will say it's kind of like meeting the love of your life.
Right.
And you're not like, you're going to be the one that I marry. You can't, it doesn't work like that. Then the person's going to want to run away.
You can't just
It's
come with your list and be like, well, you check every single list here, right?
it's gotta be a little more romantic and have those, moments of quiet and silence and kind of have this dance happen.
Yeah, but I think the world has increasingly become a place where people want bandage solutions, and I think that where the economy, if you're looking at some like rising industries, that's what it gives, like, right, a product. This is especially the case in America, where it's all about something has a product, right? Like, what is the
Mhm,
one-off solution you give to that? But things where humans have been doing for centuries, like procreation,
mhm.
defies the odd of that. No matter how many one-off band-aid solutions you're gonna have, it's not going to click. And I keep telling this to all my patients, who not only just for fertility, but for every odd syndromes under the sun, as I have a lot of patients who have very difficult, complex disorders, is that when you commit to something that is trying to get pregnant or trying to get better, it's like when you go to a Taoist temple or you go to any church or any religious place, you go and you put a slice of your piece of your heart and piece of your mind there because you're really committed, right, in that given moment. And that's all I'm asking for as a provider.
Yeah.
Um, don't always go into it with, oh, but what about this? What about this? What about this? Like, why don't we settle this one first? So, talk about nervous system. You can come down first. Otherwise, your nervous system is all over the place, where you're like, you're not doing anything like, fully. So,
And what other suggestions do you ever give people, suggestions that they could do outside of the what you're helping them with? Because I would typically say even, like, you can come in, do the acupuncture, even take the herbs and supplements, but if you're going back and having a crazy stressful time, then
mm,
it's going to pretty much negate a lot of what we did.
right.
So I'll suggest things even like grounding or spending a little time in the morning of
Mhm.
silence or peace just to kind of get themselves into a partnership really with me on their health.
Um, we have a 16-page behavior report that
Mhm.
we customize for every single new patient, that I will hold them to it. That includes
Okay.
nutrition
So, yeah.
and also lifestyle tips.
Mhm.
For people who try to get pregnant specifically, I give, like, I consider this not as tips. I consider this as just like, you need to do it, is to get your husband or your partner or whoever donates the sperm tested as
Mhm.
soon as possible, and making sure they're not drinking like 6 bottles of beer a day. Like, like,
Mhm.
if you're
Yeah.
in this, like, situation, preparing for pregnancy, they should too. And I usually advocate for morning intercourse rather than night
Mhm.
intercourse during ovulation to increase the chances. And there are a bunch of specific ones I usually give, like, on a patient to patient base, but I also will tell people to spend at least 1 or 2 hours of a day to practice the Taoist principle of Wu Wei.
I
Um,
love that. That's my favorite, by the way. I'm
and
obsessed with Wu Wei.
your New York patients will be like, no, but like, can I actually go cycling during that time? I'm like, no. The point of Wu Wei is you do nothing productive. Then you put them in a conundrum because they're like, then I'm just wasting my time. I'm like, no.
Wait, so people who don't know Wu Wei, can you explain?
So Wu Wei is the Taoist principle of doing nothing. It's a practice I regularly issue to people to forcefully calm their mind. So I give a bunch of suggestions to what you can do for your Wu Wei. Like, for example, you can knit, but not because you're knitting for a nephew or something. You're learning to knit not because you're good at it, it's because you want to. So it's to completely deviate from a lifestyle where we're chasing daily achievement all the time, right? It's more about resting your body and mind and focus on what matters on the present, which traditionally you'd think it doesn't matter. So one of my favorite things, even when I lived in New York City, was to really sit in a random coffee shop and just sit there, read my book, or like judge people's sense of fashion. So I will like people judge when I'm in the cafes. Like, what did you do during that time? Nothing. But I always feel like great,
But
right?
it's like effortless effort. You're still there. It's not like
Yeah.
you're totally inactive. You're still there, but you're like in this neutral flow
Right.
state.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that's very important because there is nothing more difficult to a person who tries to get pregnant than thinking they're losing time. They're being told that they're losing time, they're late by every possible doctor under the sun. But that is time is a being late or not is a relative concept, as we say in Chinese
Yep.
medicine,
It's
right?
true.
So oftentimes you will see people like signing up for IVF, not because they're physically ready, it's because they are told they are short on time, right?
Correct.
You don't do this now, you
It's
can't do it in
pressure.
3 months. But statistics don't work like that. Like you said, within 3 months, your body is not going to dramatically change. You must well spend the time to take care of yourself, then really increase your chances rather than I'm going to dive into this when I'm super stressed, pinning so much hope on this. So yeah, again, I mean, I think that's really the thing. Like having a child and being pregnant is not just something you must do in life. It's more than that. It's a mile. It's a phase in life. One doesn't have to have it, but if you do decide to have it, I really think that people need to take a broader view on it.
100%. I think that is so beautifully put because it is a big picture and it's you can't just take the part and then look at the part and say, "Okay, that's it." You have to look at like how it interplays and works
Right.
together as a whole organism. And
Right.
that's when you get the big picture and yeah, and I think about like, the yin and the yang, being too young all the time, you're going to burn out the yin. And that's ultimately the nervous system right there,
Yeah.
having that
Exactly.
balance.
Yeah, exactly. I think the society demands us to constantly deliver.
Mhm.
The question is, what are you delivering? There isn't a return policy for a parent. Once the child
Right.
is here, you're responsible for them for life. So this is not just I just want to get pregnant. This is a how it's going to completely transform your life without wrecking you, because your identity will be rewritten the minute you're pregnant, when you become a parent. And I think people need to probably, take it. I always say, like, take it more seriously, but also take it less seriously.
Mhm.
Because I think people take it really seriously on the am I pregnant or not pregnant part, right? But that don't take that too seriously. But like people need to consider what that means, the implication, your health more seriously.
Yeah, for sure. And so if people and it really helps to have somebody to work with because I think that there's a lot of reminders that can be done from somebody who's looking at it more objectively and not in it because it's very hard to
Yeah,
understand what you're sharing if you're not working with somebody else. And I think that that's like the benefit on top of obviously getting the therapy, but also getting, the treatments and also getting that perspective because
right.
when you're too in it, it's very hard to decipher. So I think that that is very priceless. So for people who want to work with you, what do you offer?
I think that if you're interested in, and I always say this as a dare, and those are kinds of my favorite tongue readings to do, is that people who say like, no, I won't tell you anything. I just give you my tongue. And then they're completely in shock when I spell out all their life secrets. So I think that's the number one thing you can do. And in these tongue readings, I also give 3 quick suggestions, but I give a very good overview of like what you're not telling me about what's happening with your health. And that's a very fun thing to do because everyone has a tongue, right? And tongue reading is one of the most traditional things we offer in Chinese medicine. But usually the more serious part is the one-on-one consultation with me online, and then customized herbal formulation. I would say like 95% of my one-on-one patients are on customized herbal formulation. And
Mhm.
then we do the monthly follow-up for that. And then there is also a bunch of digital small booklets, recipe books like that that I have written. For example, I have a postpartum recipe booklet that I
Mhm.
highly recommend for anybody who is pregnant and you don't know what really you heard about this myth about Chinese women eating different things postpartum. You don't know
Mhm.
what that is. I wrote a 20-page, I believe, recipe book that includes
Oh, that's
breakfast, lunch,
amazing.
and dinner and snack for
Awesome.
that. So that's a lot of like self-study resources as well. Yeah.
That's great. Sounds awesome. And you do raw herbs?
No, I only do granule.
Oh, granule, which is so
Yeah.
easy, but it
Which is
also is
super
effective
easy.
because it's easy to digest, easier than
Right.
pills.
And everything is made to order. So we have patients from Scotland to Singapore.
Nice.
It's
Love that.
we so it's everything is made to order, and I co-write a formula with my dad for every single patient. So
Fantastic. And
yeah.
how can people find you?
You can follow us at KUN Health, KUN Health. I believe we're on TikTok as well, but I never check TikTok. I'm a little bit scared of TikTok. So Instagram is my
It's
comfort.
funny, I never got into TikTok too. I just do
Yeah.
reels on Instagram. I just love Instagram.
Yeah. I think TikTok is a little bit of a wild scenario. But yeah, Instagram is where I think do the most. So
Awesome. Well, it was such a pleasure talking to you.
thank
You
you for your
sound
time.
like a wealth of knowledge, and I love your perspective and really how you understand, really from diet and also herbals, which is an art in itself. So thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for
much.
coming on today. It was such a
Thank you
pleasure
so much.
talking to you.
Thank you.